Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 31 of the Elevate Your Craft podcast. Jump rope training can be extremely frustrating. Just like in many other scenarios, having the ability to be patient, even in some of the most frustrating situations, is valuable. In jump rope, this applies because we're developing a new skill. In the previous episode of the podcast, I discussed technique and efficiency, and some things to look for when striving for both. I felt the need to write this episode because I found that what I'll be discussing goes along with these concepts really well, and I feel would be a valuable addition. And these topics are mindset around frustration and making errors, and ways to identify and use mistakes. So much of my training was passive early on, and it wasn't until about a year and a half to 2 years ago that I was able to make every second count. And what I mean by that is not letting frustration get to me. And even if that particular session was plagued with mistakes, I would put them under the microscope and learn from them. And while frustration is subjective and may not affect some like others, mistakes are inevitable and everyone will make them. But by being able to not get bogged down by mistakes and instead use them, our training becomes a lot more strategic and effective. For the past couple years, I've been fortunate enough to slowly eliminate frustration to the point that I don't really dwell on it anymore. I use it as an indicator. In the worst case scenario, if I'm making a ton of mistakes and I'm having a difficult time really doing anything effectively, I'll either switch to basic skills and practice fundamentals, or put the rope down for the day and just do something else. This way, I'm still getting something out of the training. Sometimes it just doesn't go our way, and it's important to take these types of experiences in stride. The reason I don't dwell in frustration anymore is my perception around it has changed. Firstly, challenges will exist through the entire process, no matter how good you are. There are always ways we can improve, and with this comes new ways in which we can mess up. But at the core of it, frustration indicates that our current approach isn't working, and our strategy needs to change. From this idea, when challenges in my training would arise that I couldn't overcome easily, I'd ask myself, how can I approach this in a different way? Or is there an area that I need to improve before I can do this? For example, I had a lot of trouble with improving my crossover where my right arm would cross over my left. The other way, left over right, I had no issues, which made it all the more frustrating. Finally, I admitted I had to come up with a new strategy. So from there, I began shadow jumping only the weak side, just practicing the mechanics over and over again. In the previous episode, I talk about knowing where your hands need to be and paying attention to how they're getting there. That's what I did. Over time, I once again introduced the rope and was miles ahead of where I was previously. Through examples like this, I was able to learn an important lesson that harkens to the saying that goes, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. If you're becoming frustrated with a movement or trick, try and break it down to its fundamental parts and build them individually. If you're having issues with the individual parts, it may be that you have not built the proper foundation for that technique yet. For example, part of my training is watching video of rope athletes that I admire and slowing it down as much as possible to closely analyze their hand positioning and movements. This is the way I learned of arm wraps, and I was pretty hype about it at the time. In attempting them, however, I was having a lot of issues and realized that I needed to tighten up my side swings before I could effectively perform arm wraps. Not only that, I needed to understand this new way the rope was swinging and how to work with it. Jump rope can be pretty unforgiving, especially if your focus is tricks. Like any skill, it takes time and patience. In the end, you have to enjoy the process or else you won't actually put the time and dedication in. If you find you're getting frustrated with a particular movement or technique, slow things down and come up with a new strategy. Often it is one slight adjustment that will open the door to what you're looking for, so pay close attention. Frustration is telling you something. Listen to it. One technique that I use during my training is what I call a reset. And this is where if I make an error, like a rope catch or tangle, I will take my time getting back into the starting position. I'll close my eyes, take a deep breath, and begin again. I found that before, I would always rush to get back into jumping, which would often only cause more mistakes because of poor setup, frustration, embarrassment, or all three. The reset allowed me to collect myself, slow down, and get at it again. One other thing to consider is the goal of your current workout. If you're looking to train endurance, you want to maximize your time jumping. Because of this, it's a good idea to keep your jumping simple and not use too many different tricks or techniques because they will increase the probability of errors occurring. The most I usually do when training the endurance side are the fundamental techniques like the bounce step or alternating step. These are the two most basic techniques that should be mastered in any case, so it's good to practice them while also training for endurance. You'll get a lot of repetitions in. It also helps to have a focus within your training session. This way you can target it, which will ensure you're making progress in the areas that you want. As the specificity principle says, if you want to get better at something specific, you're best to practice that specific thing. It also allows you to identify the areas where you tend to make errors and then work to correct them. These corrections will then very likely benefit the rest of your training. It can also be beneficial to schedule a freestyle part to your training to open everything up and have some fun. An example would be if you normally train for 1 hour, the last 15 minutes could be devoted to freestyling. And there's also a benefit to doing this that might not be apparent right away, and it's especially beneficial to those looking to create combos or different routines. By allowing yourself to freestyle, you see which techniques, movements, tricks, or movement patterns you rely on. If you're a stickler like me, it also helps to identify which side you favor most, and that will highlight your weaker one. Knowing all of these things can be valuable in identifying whether you want to introduce more or less diversity in your training. When it comes to weak and dominant sides, it's very likely that once you get into trying new things with the rope, you'll be more competent on a certain side in techniques that involve moving one or both handles, the body, or a mixture out of neutral position. I cited the example of the crossover already. However, others include rotations, arm wraps, or single leg techniques. For me, the crossover was the first instance this became apparent, but another is the right side swing. While my left was working very well, when swinging to the right, I would keep the handles too close together and I wasn't staggering them. Similarly, when performing tricks that involve turning 180 or 360 degrees, I found that I was rotating slower clockwise versus counterclockwise. These are all occurrences that are specific to me. However, what I want to illustrate is that you will likely experience discrepancies in your own way. It's important to acknowledge them and not ignore the weaker side. I'm particularly picky when it comes to this and do not feel I can truly perform a trick unless I can execute it competently on both sides. Regardless, I encourage you to master techniques in both directions for the overall greater benefits and skill level it will bring. In dealing with these discrepancies, I normally put double the amount of time or reps into the weaker side. So for example, currently I'm working on the front-back crossover and find it more difficult to perform when my left hand is behind. That being the case, I will do double the amount of reps for it. I will also spend more time breaking down the movement patterns, mechanics, and shadow jumping. It's important to do this because as your skill level increases and the demands for solid technique and mechanics become greater, holes in your training will become more and more apparent. Furthermore, the habits you have likely developed over thousands and thousands of repetitions will be harder to undo. Overall, working with the weak side can be a bit more tedious, however, it is well worth it. The final area I want to touch on in this section is the type of rope that you are using. It's important to understand how much rope type will affect the dynamic of your jumping, especially if you practice with one type predominantly. Because of this, you'll have to adapt, which can be a bit tedious. In episode number 27 of the podcast, I discussed the different types of ropes in detail, so I encourage you to check that out. But the reason I bring this up is it's important that the type of rope you are using aligns with your goals. If they don't, it can hinder your success and be frustrating to deal with. For example, if you're looking to practice tricks, especially crossbody ones, and you're using a steel cable rope, it will prove harder to perform due to the nature of the rope. Similarly, if you tend to use a PVC rope and you're used to the rotation of it, and then move on to a heavier leather one, it can affect your timing and cause catches. Changing ropes will require an adaptation phase, specifically if you are a beginner. I encourage you to practice with a single type until the necessary foundation is developed. Once you have enough experience and understand the ideal usage of each type of rope, you can have a little fun and challenge yourself. What I often do is train double and triple unders using a long-handled rope, which isn't ideal. However, I understand the challenges that are presented when using it, so I know it will take time and a bit more effort to develop it. If I wanted to be more strategic, I would go with at least a PVC rope, or even better, a steel cable rope with shorter handles that doesn't challenge my grip as much. So if you choose to change ropes often, or use ropes that aren't ideal for the situation, understand that it may take a bit longer to adapt, and mistakes will likely occur more often in that adaptation phase. For those new to rope, you may feel that sucking will make you look bad, especially if you train in public. Who cares? If you aren't willing to put yourself out there, you won't get anywhere. Keep practicing. How can you expect to be skilled at something if you haven't put your time in? Remember, jump rope is a skill that needs to be developed. Try and zone others out and focus on your goals. Don't rush. If you make a mistake, reset and get at it again. I've seen dozens of people pick up a rope, make mistakes, get frazzled over it, and within 3 to 5 minutes, just abandon it altogether. Put yourself out there, and with time, you will have an audience. Now, onward to using errors to improve. For a long time in my training, I just kind of plowed through mistakes and didn't really use them to their full potential. Of course, I was getting better, but I didn't really know how or why necessarily. Why was I able to now perform the crossover? Or why was I now able to perform the side swing without the rope tangling? Really, it comes down to the things that I've discussed in previous podcasts, like improving technique, tightening mechanics, choosing the right rope, finding the right rope length. But another valuable way to look at it is understanding how you're making your mistakes and exactly what you did to fix them. Often we'll do this subconsciously, but if we're able to bring this to the forefront and actively study it, the rewards are tremendous. And this is a view that I've only begun to take advantage of fairly recently. In this section, I will ask questions that create hypothetical scenarios, then offer some brief pointers on what may be happening. Before I get into it, I want to get something across. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're telling you something, so be sure to look for the message. Every time you make an error, stop, keeping your legs and hands exactly where they were when the error occurred. Notice the rope. Where is it? This will give you a good picture of why the error occurred in the first place, and the movement patterns you might need to change to correct it. This is partly why it's so important to train in front of the mirror. I reiterate, jump rope is a skill that needs to be developed. It's an amazing conditioning tool and a great way to get your cardio in, but it's important to understand that in order to truly unlock those things, you'll need to practice. Now, some things to notice. Number 1, where are your hands? Are they not getting to where they should be with the correct technique? If the rope tangled, that generally occurs because the handles of the rope are brought close together. The handles may need to be more staggered. Did the rope catch on a specific side of the body? Look at the hands and or feet and see where they're positioned and how they are moving relative to each other. Number 2, based on where your hands are, how does the arc of the rope look? Is there enough clearance for your body? Do you need to widen the arc or perhaps use a rope with longer handles? A good indicator of this is if you're contracting the body inward by closing off the chest or bending at the knees during a jump to a greater degree. Shoulder mobility may come into play here if you're attempting crossbody tricks and are finding it difficult to bring the arms far enough across the body. This could also be true for only one arm that has less mobility than the other. It may be a good idea to supplement your training with stretches and keep your grip lower on the handles. Number 3, is the arc of the rope leaning more to one side than the other? Check your wrist rotation speed or whether the hands are placed evenly on the horizontal plane. Number 4, how much clearance does the arc have above your head when performing rotations with proper technique? It should not be more than a foot. If it is, the rope is too long, which can cause the rope to smack the ground and rebound up, causing catches. Furthermore, it will negatively affect the rotation and speed of the rope. Number 5, are the handles parallel to the ground? Does the rope catch on the left or right foot consistently? Break down your movements and look at your posture and technique. You want to make sure the hands are in an even horizontal plane in this scenario as well. Also, be sure you're rotating the rope at the wrists and not the elbows or shoulders. Number 6, are you not able to return to the single bounce step from a trick with no errors? It is just as important to know the mechanics of how to come out of a trick as going in. If so, work with the mechanics through shadow jumping without the rope if necessary. Go through the movements slowly to become more comfortable. Number 7, is one leg clearing the rope but the other isn't? If so, how are your legs positioned while jumping or landing? Is one leg bending to a greater degree, creating more clearance than the other? Or are you turning the hips, bringing one leg behind? If so, make sure the legs are evenly matched and the hips face forward. You should be landing in the same spot each jump. If you aren't, you need to develop greater strength, timing, and control. Number 8, are you not landing on the balls of the feet? Landing flat-footed is not only inefficient and more conducive to injury, but will hinder speed and technique. Develop your technique using shadow jumping without the rope, then slowly bring it back when you're more comfortable. It's important to get a feel for jumping, especially when you are new. Number 9, are you jumping more than once per rotation? If so, work on your timing using shadow jumping, particularly the steps involving jumping without the rope. You should only be bouncing once to maximize efficiency. Number 10, is your rope in poor condition? Are there kinks? Are you using the right rope for your goals? Be sure to take care of your rope. Do not wrap the rope around the handles when you're finished with it, or create any sharp bends or folds. This is especially true if you're using a steel cable rope. Ropes should be coiled loosely and kept at room temperature. It also helps to hang the rope from a hook when not in use. Number 11, are your shoulders getting excessively sore? If so, be aware of how you're gripping the handles. Grip should be loose and relaxed. An exception could be if you're using a rope specifically for upper body conditioning, such as one with a heavy rope or in which the handles are weighted. Now, this is a sampling of some of the common scenarios from my own experience and others that I have observed. If you pay close attention to how you're jumping and break down your mistakes, you will improve tremendously in a shorter amount of time because it brings clarity and allows you to pinpoint what needs to be improved. It's an active approach. This is true even if you limit it to a certain portion of your training. What I've discussed certainly doesn't cover everything, but what I want to stress is becoming keenly aware of what you are doing and how you are doing it. This includes all the great things you're doing, not only the mistakes. Celebrate and reinforce your successes. Drill and refine your techniques, and you will be able to perform them correctly consistently. Mistakes are an asset that you can use to improve your training. Frustration is telling you that you need to refine your strategy, so try not to get bogged down by it. I encourage you to check out the other episodes of the podcast on rope training, particularly episode number 24, in which I talk about shadow jumping. I can't overstate its importance in developing the foundation of proper rope jumping technique. That's it for this episode of the podcast, guys. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and the Instagram handle is EYCKAS, and that is also true for Tumblr and Twitter at EYCKAS. The Facebook page is Elevate Your Craft, all one word, and you can also check out the website at www.elevateyourcraft.net. That's it for today, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.